I guess maybe we should start talking about the whole mess that's been going on in the outside the Super Bowl in the
Hmm.
NFL, and we're talking
Yeah,
about the whole mess in Miami and
and New York.
New York. But
Yeah.
here's the thing. One thing I'll preface it with. I remember way back when Tony Dungy was laboring as a coordinator, and basically everybody in the NFL was screaming, "Will somebody please hire Tony Dungy?" And not because Tony Dungy was black, but because Tony Dungy was great, and because and as a result, being black would be, a the perfect step in the right direction toward diversifying the NFL coaching ranks. Okay, here's the thing that that I would like to see more of. That I want more Tony Dungy's, but where or for example, Kim Ang, who of course worked as an assistant for Brian Cashman, but also with the Dodgers, and with her, everybody was saying there will be a woman GM, and we know who it's going to be. The question is who's going to take a chance on her. Turns out it was the Marlins. That's what I want to see, because there are plenty of people out there. When somebody says, "Oh, they should always go for the most qualified candidate," no, there are plenty of qualified candidates out there, and you've been passing them over. Okay, now we can get into it.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. It was, it was kind of sad seeing. Well, definitely sad seeing that. For sure, just the treatment of Flores, and well, just other black coaches too coming out and saying, on one hand, being getting fired for being too successful is certainly the indication. I got out of it with in Flores' scenario with what happened in Miami, and that's it's really messed up, especially from an ownership standpoint, to where you're getting rid of coaches for doing too good, and Flores obviously it's tough in his scenario too, because he's not the best coach, sure, but he's proven he could be an NFL coach, and there's and you definitely see these issues where in the coaching realms, to where, and not just the NFL, but really all sports too. NHL also comes to mind, where it really becomes, part of the boys club, to where if you're not, in that inner circle of the same 20, 25 guys, then you get a lot less chances, number one. And number two, you really don't get much of an opportunity to showcase that you could belong in the old boys club. And, we see the same passing around of coaches that really shouldn't be there, taking up spots from coaches who deserve an opportunity and don't even get them.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with you on that one. I on the air a couple weeks ago said that I wanted Brian Flores to be the coach of the Giants. And I kind of still stick with it. I just thought he did a great job turning the Dolphins around in a year, and I thought it took tremendous character, from somebody to do something like that, right? To get a team back together and get them to win. So I was in favor of the Giants hiring him. I do, agree with the point, Matt, that you're making. We just want good people and let's get them in. I think when
But the whole point is that you may get some kind of saying that we're only looking at the most qualified people, and then the coaches are it's all lily white, and that's not the case. That's the thing.
I agree.
That there are plenty of qualified people of all non-white people, African American people, who are being passed over, and everybody knows they're good, and they're not breaking through the glass ceiling. And there is a glass ceiling there. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I also agree with the idea that if you hire a minority coach, I think it would just pay off in dividends for you. I think I also think it's becoming a younger man's coaching job, right? Because you got to relate to the players. And I think the retreads have got to stop, to be honest with you. It's like an old safety valve that you want to go to and you want to pick. I just don't think that's the way to go. Like, I think a perfect example right now, and I think he's a really good coach. oh shoot, I'm not going to remember his name. New Orleans Saints coach.
Well, what's Sean Payton? Not anymore.
Yeah, Sean Payton. So he was, I think. So Sean Payton, you've had a great career. Now it's time for you to step aside and hand it off to somebody else, right? And let's have the next generation of coaches come in and stake their claim, right? You've had your run. Step aside and move on. I think that's one of the things that we have to start seeing, and then we have an opportunity to do that. Who's going to step outside of the box and hire? I think, this is different in a lot of ways, but obviously the Rams hire Sean McVay and what an outside of the box just hiring a 30-year-old was, right? And he's proven to be very effective. I think there's a lot of other candidates that you can hire outside of the box from all walks of life that would be excellent candidates that would do a really good job.
Yeah, and just to your point, that is there. It's from the Defector website. 15% of NFL coaches are currently related, or rather, are related to current and/or former coaches in the entirety of the NFL. And a decade ago, you had 8 black NFL head coaches. As of right now, there's only 1, and you're seeing the turnover with black coaches happen a lot faster too. It's obviously smaller data. There's only been about 20 or so in the league over the last 30, 40 years, or just only the last 30 years, which in and of itself is a bit of a problem there as well, where, the numbers of players aren't accurately reflecting, of black players aren't reflective in the coaching, where it's predominantly white. And just with that, if it was over 40%, I remember that over 40% of the coaches, of black coaches, got fired after a good season. Jim Caldwell was one off the top of my mind, where the Lions, they finished 9-7 and get released.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think you could say that about Brian Flores again this year as well too. Yeah. The one story that I think is really going to stick from this one as well too. I mean, it's a tragedy what's going on with minority coaches. But I also think the other thing that's really going to stick with it, if they make hay with this, he was going to get paid more to lose stuff. I think that could be a huge black eye for the NFL as well too, because that seems just so counterintuitive to what the league is supposed to be about.
Well, it's essentially throwing games, and you can't throw games.
Exactly.
You cannot enter into these partnerships with gambling, bookmaking out organizations and then taint the integrity of your game by throwing it. I mean, it doesn't matter why you throw it. Okay, the Black Sox scandal, everybody knows the games were thrown to, cover bets. This is not to cover bets. This is for a different purpose. It doesn't matter. If there's even a hint of anybody trying to lose on purpose, how can you bet?
Yeah, I agree with that. And we don't see anything right now during football games, but, these apps for your phones, these betting apps for your phones to have more. So that the NFL has jumped into bed with these things.
And they want their cut. It's been around all along. They want their cut.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you're going to do it, those games, everything has to be straight up. They cannot be tainted whatsoever.
Okay, get Jay from Center Reach on the phone. And Jay, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you guys?
Okay, what's on your mind?
I was just listening peacefully. I had a few thoughts about the whole Stony Brook moving to the CIA, but I wanted to just, what made me call was actually what the guy just said about coaches getting out of the way and making, older coaches getting out of the way and making room for the younger ones. I don't know, have you watched New York football the last 5 or 6 years? And all the younger coaches who flopped? Todd Bowles, Pat Shermer, Joe Judge.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's go
part
on.
of that was also the rosters they had.
Not so much. Some of it, but people who weren't, they gave all these young guys a chance and they flopped. It wasn't so much the rosters, but it was the fact that they couldn't lead the team.
There's definitely a lot of experience in the rosters. Just for example, they have the youngest roster, and the Giants too have one of the youngest rosters per median this year. I think last year the Jets had the youngest roster as well.
I mean, maybe this year with Judge, but or obviously Salah's just starting out. Maybe he'll be better, but Bulls had an experienced team. They didn't do very well. Shermer, what's the guy? McAdoo inherited a playoff team, and he didn't.
Yeah, I don't feel bad that he's gone. He's gonna stink up another
Shermer
team.
Was
Carolina.
Second coming of Ray Handley.
So come on, Ray. At one
Ray
time
Handley inherited a Super Bowl champion. Look what he did with it.
Yeah, not everybody gets to be Mike Tomlin. That's what you all want. You hire, or Sean McVay, you hire somebody who's young and does that great out of the box. It happens extremely rarely. And even the great coach flopped the first time.
Jay, maybe a better way of putting it would be the outside of the box candidate. Hiring somebody. So maybe not necessarily, let's say young. Maybe we misspoke when we said that, but maybe hiring somebody who is outside of the box and not necessarily a retread. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, where can you go to hire somebody that would be, you kind of like catching on a new trend, going in a different direction. Where you really feel like you're making not necessarily a shakeup, but a guy who's going to do something a little differently. I think maybe that was, if it was me, that would be the point that I was actually trying to make.
Well,
but
let's put it this way.
Good point with
I think
the last
Daboll
coaches
fits that criteria, though. I think Daboll fits that criteria. He's not super young. Nah. He's paid his dues. He's worked his way up. He's not like, we'll see. We'll see how he does.
Let's put it this way. I'll use a different sport, but I'll use it as a perfect example. In college basketball, when you are a mid-major, like Stony Brook is, and you have an up-and-coming coach like Stony Brook did with Steve Peichel, you knew it was a matter of time that a bigger school was going to grab them. And what we want, and that happens in college all the time. Of course, there are a lot more college teams than there are pro teams, so the jobs are a little bit more plentiful anyway. But the thing I think people want to see is that, you see a lot of these guys that slog from coordinator to coordinator to coordinator and never really break through, and you want to see those guys get more chances. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes they work themselves into the rotation.
Sure,
I think
I'll go back a little bit. Remember when Jimmy Johnson was coaching the Cowboys, and he was a college coach, moved up to the NFL, did great, and because they won so much in such a short time, all his assistants became hot commodities, and none of them really, had anything noteworthy as a coaching career, and they kind of kept. Some of them are still coordinating or something somewhere. Maybe they're retired now, but all those all those guys were kicking around for a long time and never, got multiple chances, never did much to anything. Some people just are. It's more than just, you got to be able to figure out leadership. That's what the interviews have got to be about. It's more than the X's and O's at a certain point.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think the other issue too is, if you're a team like the Giants who were doing the head coach search, in terms of the experience, the veteranship, there weren't really a lot of ways to go with it for coaches in the NFL because, for anyone who really had a good chunk of experience as a head coach, you had Sean Payton, and he left, and it's not a coach for another team. It's just to take time off, and maybe he's retiring, but, the options, there weren't really too many guys in the NFL now, head coaches who, were leaving to go to another team, as a head coach, going from one to another that has, a good set few years of experience as a head coach. To me, Jim Harbaugh would have been the guy who had the most experience when he was coaching for the 49ers. But even then, he's down to Michigan, and he really only ever to Minnesota, and he's going back to look like he has any intentions to come back to the NFL. So I really don't see too much fault in the Giants signing Buffalo offensive coordinator Brian Duvall as their head coach. They have Joe Schoen as their assistant GM. He's from Buffalo. And I think they're setting up things nicely on the offensive end with Mike Kafka coming in, who helped coach Patrick Mahomes for the seasons. Now they just need to find a new defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I was going to say the most recent example of someone you said were an experienced coach going to another team was Andy Reid, probably.
Yeah, but even then, he hasn't been available for a few years, and I think that's the problem. The Giants ran into. From experience, Flores could have been a candidate for that. I think the issue for the there's a couple issues obviously, but I think one for the Giants was that he was seemingly insistent on getting Deshaun Watson as quarterback, and that clashed with what the Maras wanted, where they wanted to stick with Daniel Jones, and it looked like Sean was more open to continuing to build Jones. The ball was the same way, so Jones didn't get probably one last shot to prove he belongs in the NFL.
No, but I mean, if you're not on the same page as ownership, that's a legitimate reason not to get hired. That has nothing to do with race.
Yeah.
I mean, he had the same problem in Miami, unfortunately. I don't know why he's so high on Deshaun Watson when that's the real question. Why? Maybe he'll wind up in Houston.
Yeah, the talent's there, but the character for Deshaun Watson just isn't. And I agree, it shocks me too, because I don't know why any team would want to take a risk there with the 24 allegations
that's the
put up against him. It's not in a criminal court case now, but it's still lingering there for the past year plus. It's tough to really take a risk on a guy like that when he could be gone at any moment and potentially headed to prison if the allegations are true. But just going back to the original discussion, for guys like Flores and Caldwell, it's really tough, the situation they're in, because you're seeing, and I think this is where the Giants could be at fault too, like many other teams, is there were rules. The Rooney Rule is the one I'm going to be referring to, where it emphasized teams interviewing minority coaches, giving them opportunities, and teams will be rewarded with draft picks. And I think, the Giants messed up interviewing a guy like Flores if they weren't even going to give him the job, because this all came about when Bill Belichick accidentally texted the wrong Brian about winning the head coaching gig, to not only waste these people's time, but also show they're not worth it. And when you already make a decision and then bring along the second guy anyway, it's just a huge slap in the face to everyone, the league, the coaches, people doing the interviews. And again, to try to do it for a potential draft pick is, I think, the most disgusting part, because, it shows the value you see in these coaches that are trying to prove that they deserve to be the leader for the team on the sidelines.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what but they only had one side of, clearly we've only heard one side of the story, and clearly a draft pick isn't that worth it, but maybe he got there and found out that, or maybe the Giants had to talk to him to know that they weren't on the same page. They interviewed Graham too, so they weren't, that's another whole story. Why Graham's just bolted for a lateral move.
His departure was shocking for sure. Internally, according to reports, was shocking that he left to Vegas. And you got to think too, as an African-American coach, how much did the lawsuits play a factor? Did he feel similarly? Did he feel that way if he got when he got interviewed for the head coaching spot? He's friends with Josh McDaniels, who's going to be the new head coach for the Raiders. So that, of course, obviously played a factor. But how much did the other news, also contribute to that? And that's
Josh McDaniels,
where the issues really shine.
Josh McDaniels, another young guy who they got a chance to be a head coach and flopped the first time. So we'll see what happens this time.
Well,
maybe he'll do better.
The modern day Tony Dungy is Eric Bieniemy. Okay, perfect example of a guy who everybody in the league is saying, why doesn't this guy have a head coaching job? And he keeps getting passed over. The big beef that Flores mentioned and other coaches have mentioned is that the Rooney Rule is basically the problem with the Rooney Rule is that the letter of the rule is being followed, but the spirit of the rule is being completely ignored. The whole point of the Rooney Rule was to get people to diversify the group of people they interview, and hopefully that more qualified African-American coaches can come through and surface and say what they have to say and get the job. Right. Well, it doesn't happen that way, and I'll give you an example. It was Flores who said he interviewed for the Denver Broncos head coaching job a couple of years ago, and John Elway and other team executives showed up an hour late and they were hungover, and Flores believed they'd been drinking the night before. So they didn't take the interview seriously. They were doing it to satisfy a requirement. Now, I will tell you straight up, because it's happened to me, that there are several organizations like that. It isn't necessarily for diversity. Let's say, for example, right here on this campus, you don't have a Rooney Rule, but you do. If you post a job, you have to interview a certain number of people for it, no matter no matter what their background is. And you can't even if you already know who you're gonna hire, you have to interview other people for the job, and which is a complete waste of time if you're one of those people.
Yeah, no, I've had that experience in my life too.
Yeah, I mean, anybody's been in the workforce, it's happened.
I went through the interview that I really had no chance of getting the job,
because they had already chosen the person. They were just posting the thing in order to satisfy this rule, and that's basically what the Rooney Rule has turned out to be. How do you get Eric Bieniemy a job? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's start with him and let's keep working. But how do you because there are a lot of Eric Bieniemys out there, and who can't seem to break through the glass ceiling. We're talking about, Sean Payton is only 2 years older than me. Sean Payton could have kept that job for as long as he wanted to, but he just didn't. He left on his own volition. He retired. He says, my heart's not in it anymore. And he coached for 15 years.
When you look at minority coaches, to me, it feels like the only coach who has, I feel like, that same respect would be Mike Tomlin. And he's a pretty young coach. I think he's in his mid-40s, so he can still do this for another 10, 20 years if he wants. But, there's really not a lot of others out there where they're not on the hot seat, essentially, season to season. And stuff.
Well, that's the other thing. Lately, and this it has a lot to do with the fact that, I don't know, I sometimes, I'm not going to give full credit to John Madden, for example, because I do believe that one of the great things about John Madden is that he made the intricacies of football accessible to the average fan, which nobody had done before. And there's only one other person who I believe is as good at doing that, making the intricacies of football accessible, and that is our own Kurt Hilton. But that's another story. And you've heard Kurt on the air. So, sure. In any case, what I'm saying is that coaches, the jobs don't turn over as easily as they used to, unless, of course, the front office is notoriously inept, local teams. But, take a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Somebody put this up on social media today. Pittsburgh Steelers, 3 coaches in the last 53 years. Jacksonville Jaguars, 4 coaches in the last 2.
Yep.
It was like the old Dodgers with O'Malley and Olsen.
Walter Olsen signed 23 one-year contracts, and then Tommy Lasorda went another 20 years.
So, but on the other hand, we have 32 teams, 9 coaches got fired, or
what the locals
8 got fired and 1 quit.
And
but,
just go kind of back
league
to
is
the
up.
General, topic of Giants and their recent moves. I think these were the right moves, and I think you have a win-win between Flores and the ball, and I think either could shine pretty. I think they're gonna do better than this year, which isn't saying much.
The other thing too is that
it matters when you saw how bad this year ended.
Here's another problem though, and look, the other thing is that you often make hiring decisions based on prior relationships. In other words, if you know somebody, you work with the person before and know he's good, you hire him. Okay, if he's available. And this is the perfect case with Schoen and the Ball. They worked together, they knew each other, and that is something that's difficult to overcome in any case. But you want to know something? Eric Bieniemy's worked with a bunch of people too. Why doesn't anybody hire him? I'm using Bieniemy as the example because he appears to be the most prominent black coach out there who has not gotten his shot yet. He is today's Tony Dungy. And Dungy, for a long time, labored in the trenches until he finally got his shot.
And I think, the NFL could resolve. I think the right would just be acknowledging that, there's discrepancy there and working to fix it. Because, the NBA, for a long time was strongly white, and it starts at the top and goes down. The NFL, there's only two minority owners, the aforementioned Jags owner being one of them, Shi Khan. But it's tough when you don't have minorities working in the offices as GMs, assistant GMs, etc. And they're kind of doing is assistant coaching. It's tough to, especially doing interviews and having people who control the team. It's tough seeing other opportunities to lead teams when, as I said, their ceilings is essentially being assistants or being players. It's going forward. I think if the league's able to make an adjustment to where you start seeing them, in more positions of power, like we see in the NBA with GMs, head coaches, presidents, etc., for teams like Celtics, Raptors, so on and so forth. You can see changes to where you start to have more black coaches, more minorities coaching, NFL teams, and these discussions don't really have to happen as much. But it's going to be up to the league to really change it.
Can be bad too. We've had good and bad. Let's not forget what Isaiah Thomas did to the Knicks.
We're trying to, but the Knicks keep reminding us.
I mean, we don't like it, but I thought it was a good time to bring it up. All right.
No, because the Knicks' continued mediocrity keeps reminding us of how long it's been since the Knicks have been consistently good. When you're pining for Dave Checketts to come back, then there's a problem.
Oh boy.